Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is music producer, mixer, and educator Kevin Kelly. First of all, who would have thought, but getting nominated for a Grammy may have a negative effect on the creative side of the nominee. A new Yale study suggests that Grammy nominations often come with this downside. Now, this is researched over 60 years of Grammy winners and nominees, and they found that if you win a Grammy, you grow creatively because you feel empowered. So the next album, the next record, the next release is something new. But if you're nominated and you lose, you tend to become cautious and then conform to the style and norms of the genre. Now, considering that 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 win, that means that the net effect is negative on those nominees. The losers, the nominees, tend to stick close to what got them nominated in hopes of winning the next time around. The study also speculates that the loss might cause anxiety that makes it harder and harder to be even more creative. If this is true, awards are ultimately bad for artists, the genre, and fans as well. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. Also, I'm pleased to announce that the 5th edition of my Mixing Engineer's Handbook is now available. It's totally updated and includes new sections on mixing and immersive audio, self-mastering, new mixer interviews, and much more. Get your copy at a special discounted price at bobbyowsinski.com/handbook. You can also find it on Amazon and Apple Books. And remember, you can learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news when you sign up for my newsletter at bobbyowsinski.com. There you'll also find out about openings for my latest online classes and special events. That's bobbyowsinski.com. Now, something that tends to be overlooked is the fact that vinyl records are really bad for the environment. And considering that now they have the highest demand that they've had in 30 years, maybe it's time to get a green solution. Well, a Dutch company out of Eindhoven thinks that they have a greener fix. They have a new vinyl presser that they came up with that uses 90% less energy and provides 40% more capacity. That's not all, though. It doesn't use PVC, which is the most damaging of plastics and what's been used in records since they first came out. In fact, they use PET. PET is what you find in bottles that you recycle. It's a much more durable plastic, and of course, it's a lot greener. There's a problem, though, in that a lot of people say, well, we would have done this a long time ago, but it doesn't sound as good. Now they're saying, though, that you shouldn't be worried about the sound. The molecular attributes of this plastic hold up to PVC, and in listening tests, this tends to be what people are hearing. Now, the bad side is that the costs will be higher, at least initially, but this is going to be a lot better off for the planet in the long run. My guest this week is Kevin Kelly, who's a producer, mixer, and longtime educator with the host of major label, film score, and jingle credits. These include projects by Blondie, Edgar and Rick Wakeman, among others, that he worked on from his well-known studio called The Workshoppe. For 14 years, Kevin was also the producer for the WLIR-FM live concert series that featured Hall Oates, Billy Joel, The Police, Charlie Daniels Band, Peter Tosh, Ziggy Marley, Pure Prairie League, and many more. And he also served as co-producer and chief engineer for a series of short-form radio shows for 60-second LP. Kevin also taught studio recording technology for 22 years at Nassau Community College, and he continues to teach one adjunct course per semester there. During the interview, we spoke about the importance of networking, the new generation of plugins, how multitasking has changed attention spans, analog summing during mixing, and much more. I spoke with Kevin via Zoom from his studio in Huntington, New York. Let's get into it. Let's go back to your background, how you get into the business. You're a bass player, right?
Yep. Yeah, I was always the guy in the band who could make the PA sound good, So, and I also had a real interest in playing around with tape decks and, recording on one and putting it through a mixer and adding a mic or two to it, the precursor to cell sync and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm that old. I guess it goes, the cliche is it goes back to seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, but the truth of the matter is there was this nun, and it was, I guess, 1959 or 60, and she directed a choir, and I took piano lessons from her, and I was just so stunned by how musical she was. Like the lesson of, musicality was, I was just in awe, So I always knew I wanted to do music. And I thought it was going to be some kind of more serious kind of music when I was a kid taking piano lessons. But then all of a sudden the Beatles came and I stopped playing piano and started playing in bands. You know how that goes.
Only too well, yes.
And then at some point, to bring it to the engineering, which has been, it's been bass playing and recording and mixing for the last, I hate to say it, but 50 years at least. I actually went into a studio on Long Island one day. There was an aha moment here. And it was called Ultrasonic in Hempstead. And they had done a whole bunch of great stuff. In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida and Kool and the Gang and Leader of the Pack and all this stuff. It had history. And, I was this little, pissant kid who was coming in to record his band. And I was waiting in the lounge. And they had the door open to the control room. And they were doing a Tidy Bowl commercial. And I heard the sound of a toilet flush on a pair of Altec 604s. And I've never been the same since. I mean, it sounded so amazing. I remember the takeaway from me is, can you imagine how great a good band could sound over that system? So, there was kind of no looking back. It was all the holy grail of trying to get to that great, big, open, clean representation, and here I am 2 careers later in terms of teaching and then coming back to this, feeling the same search.
Well, let's talk about the Workshoppe studios, because that was a big part of your life for a long time.
Yeah, it was a big part of my life. It ended and then it started up again, you know what I mean, in the last 5 years or 6 years. So one of the engineers, as a matter of fact, the engineer from that session at Ultrasonic, my first recording session, became my partner at the Workshoppe at some point. He always kind of wanted to open his own place, and I was scratching away money playing cover tunes and putting equipment together. And we opened. I actually had a physical studio in my folks' house, which is, kind of got to be pretty serious. It was 8-track when that was a big deal, and as a matter of fact, that's where I did the Blondie stuff that originally got us talking, I guess. And then, actually that summer that I was working with Blondie, we were out looking for commercial space. We were, that's when we wanted to try and find a place to build a real room. And the Workshoppe, I guess, the real studio opened its doors at some point in 75, I want to say, late 75. And, I owned it until the late 80s. So it was a solid 15 years. And then it continued to be a studio, with other owners for a total of like 35 or more years, which kind of validated all the work we did on the building. You know what I mean? It was kind of fun to realize, to go back in there. As a matter of fact, I went in and taught a class in there in my second career. The college had bought time in the room, and I took a group of students over. And I remember going in and saying, yeah, I put up that sheetrock right there. So it was a long time, but it grew to, it was a great time in the studio business, in my estimation, at least, the 70s and 80s. And we went from 8-track to 16-track to 24-track 2-inch to 2 2-inch machines to 2 rooms to, it's like, that's, and it was kind of necessary to be that frenetic in the improvements and the growth, because there were so many studios, And we joined Spars, and I was the little kid on the block compared to the Hit Factory and the record plant, and all these, Jim Tarzier from oh God, where was he from? Sigma. Walters from Power Station, all those guys, and eating lunch with them, and essentially once in a while taking a cast-off session from one of that they were looking to dump on a smaller studio or whatever. It was actually a kind of a great time. We kind of grew and started doing primarily major label work. I did Edgar Winter's Standing on Rock there. I did a bunch of work with Rick Wakeman, Arlen Roth's first 3 or 4 albums there. It really started going. It was a kind of a great thing. I love the era because it was new. It was, the technology was unfolding in ways that were, kind of eye-opening and interesting. And I still feel that a lot of the work done in that era stands up, maybe even in some ways better than some of the stuff getting cut now. I mean, a well-aligned 30th 2-inch machine and a really good +4 console and some great mics can create some great product. It's funny, obviously, the digital audio has made things much more democratic. Everybody can do stuff in their own homes, and that's a wonderful thing. That people can be more in control of the process of recording their music, which back in the day, the keys to the kingdom, where you had to go to a studio and pay the money and hire real musicians, and then there was MIDI, But, I think that some of the stuff from that era is some of the best sounding stuff ever recorded, regardless of what we can now do.
I agree. I think we hit our audio quality peak, in the late 70s, early 80s, and it hasn't gotten better since then.
Yeah. I mean, there's been reason to be excited about new things a lot of times since then. You know what I mean? But no, I think in the overall, some of the stuff from there is just, it's funny. I mean, when you look at the list of plugins that UA sells, or you look at the, or any of them, Waves, and it's basically the history of that era. It's comical because I remember finding 3 actual Pultecs for sale from little radio stations who didn't want this old tube crap around, you know what I mean, for $90 or $150 that are now probably worth $8 or $10 grand. And now that, now the plugins that we use that emulate them even have some of the patina of wear all over the front face and all that. It's just kind of comical to me.
I think now we've kind of hit the wall where just about anything that could be emulated has been done. And now we're getting down to the bottom of the barrel. I see some emulations coming out, and I'm thinking to myself, nobody wanted to use the real thing back then. Why are they doing this?
Oh, you're so right. I remember having some lexicon delays, and I remember we had this one Korg. I probably shouldn't say this kind of stuff, but I remember we had this one delay that we kind of would never want to go to, but we would if we needed to. And now it's a couple $100 from UA. You know what I mean? It's like, I'll bet it sounds just as bad. But
I'm curious. You mentioned spars, and I've always wondered about this because I was never part of a studio that was. I was a client. I wasn't a studio owner.
Got you.
But you found that spars was actually something that was helpful to you.
I think it really was because, the New York chapter, and I can't speak to the entirety of the organization everywhere in the U.S. or whatever, but it was a really, kind of friendly group of people. And it was, you could, sit down or have a beer ahead of the monthly luncheon with somebody who had a 6-room studio that Paul McCartney had just left, you know what I mean? And swap information and, get information. I used to volunteer to do presentations with other guys and all that, and, just try to be part of the world. I can tell you that there was one day at Gallagher's Steakhouse, which was the monthly spars meeting joint, that a guy named Jim Zach, who owned NOLA Studios, which was right across the street from Carnegie Hall, had a big, beautiful place. And he came in and goes, there's this label. They're an offshoot of CBS, and they want to do 11 records, but they want to do them really fast. And they, I don't know, is that something you'd be interested in? And I think there was foam coming out of my mouth at the time, And we wound up doing an imprint label called Ambient Sound, did 11 records with all these 50s groups that were still around. This was the early 80s, and with new original material. And, that was literally standing with a Budweiser in my hand at a SPARS meeting and getting the name of the guy and calling him up and having him come out. And it all happened, So networking at its best,
Real networking, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the studio business, I think for everybody, it's a business and it's difficult. Then you decided to make a switch to teaching people about it.
Yeah, there were other, I won't say it's that the studio business was dying and therefore I needed a different thing. I'll tell you what had happened. Somewhere around 85, 86, I started freelancing a lot. And I was able to do, a lot of sessions in New York. I did a couple of things in LA. I even did a couple of albums in Tokyo. And I was really enjoying it. But when you did an album back in those days, it was kind of like a 6 weeks in a row thing with 2 days off, or you'd had maybe every other Sunday off or something like that. And my older daughter was 2, and I was just not getting to be part of her life, even a little bit. You know what I mean? It was just, I remember just getting in a car and driving into Manhattan to Back Pocket Studios or someplace like that, and being there until 11 or 12 or 1, and then getting in the car and coming home, everybody's in bed, and it just didn't feel right. And there was a little bit of a wake-up call where I realized I was now well into my 30s and recording people who were 10 years younger rather than my age. And how long is that going to happen for? I don't know. It was a bunch of realizations. And there was a guy who ran the program at SUNY Fredonia, the teaching, the Tonmeister studio program. His name is David Moulton. And he became a friend because he sent interns to my studio. So we had a lot of his guys as interns, and I saw how he kind of walked around behind all these guys and gave them a leg up and really helped them find their career paths and give them good advice and all that. And I was kind of taken with his way and his demeanor, and I thought, gee, maybe someday I'll do what he does, And I guess I feel like I'm getting way too long-winded about this, but obviously you cut this stuff down, I guess. But, he had me come up and do some sort of presentation at Berkeley when he got to Berkeley. And then there was an opening up there, and I was offered a job up there. And I realized that I couldn't afford to leave New York to give up all of the engineering work that I had to go do something in a different city where I'd have no contacts. I would go from being able to work some and teaching to being, to having nothing. And then within 2 or 3 months of that, Nassau Community College decided to start a program in studio recording technology. And I, dusted off the same resume I brought up to Berkeley and wound up getting that job and staying there from 1989 to 2015. So, and what was wonderfully lucky about that was, first of all, the rest of the faculty there was real top shelf. I mean, I met a lot of great people who mentored me from the teaching standpoint, and we were beginning something. So I wasn't being handed course outlines that somebody else had taught with expectations that I would just do exactly what had always been done. There was a decent amount of latitude to design curriculum and to mold the course offerings and the like. And that in itself was really interesting to take a look back at the industry I just spent 15 years really entrenched in, and trying to make a real valid set of courses for people who wanted to be able to enter that world. The danger, of course, is that there's a lot of people who work, they stop, and then they teach, and they assume the world doesn't change.
Yeah.
And that, and lucky for me, I had this kind of second job, if you will, or as they now call it, a side hustle, where I was producing syndicated radio for a syndicator. We were putting out 365 times 3, like roughly 1,000 shows a year, real quick. And it was all Pro Tools editing. And it was literally sound tools and a Mac SE, and then graduating to the old 442 and a original Pro Tools unit. So the point is, a lot of guys my age who had come up in the era I had come up did not transition to DAWs. I was like, are you kidding? This is great. I mean, as much as I you don't have to get down on your knees and align an Atari MT-090 every morning before you start. Are you kidding me? This is great, this digital stuff. And the fact that I was able to do that radio production gig, I had DAW editing I had Pro Tools chops. And that, along with my experience in real studio contexts, I think kept the program valid for a lot of years and all that.
No, I hear you. I've run into it a lot. Since COVID, I haven't been out speaking at various colleges, but I did for quite a while. And I was always struck by one of two things: how knowledgeable and experienced some of the instructors were, and on the other hand, how neophyte they were, being one step ahead of the students sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's more of those, unfortunately. Here's a good question for you having to do with colleges of any kind. One of the things that I find interesting is the fact that just about every community college as well as major college, they all have fantastic studio facilities anymore.
Yeah.
And I look at them and I think, well, that's all well and good, but how many of the people that are actually going through this are going to be using this? So where do you come down on that? I mean, it's obviously, you have to know some of it and you have to go through it. And I get that. But the emphasis seems to be hard on hardware.
I think that that's true. If the people doing the purchasing for the program are thinking about the big bang Zoom studio that gets the students in and want, on open house days. The truth of the matter is, what's more valuable to them, I find, is, labs where they can go in a room, sit down at a recent computer with a control surface, a MIDI keyboard controller, a set of phones, and, work on modern software, and take what has been discussed in the large room, in a large studio, with a real tube tech or pull tech, and with a real, API 550A and a real 1073 Neve and all that. And they now they've seen the physical thing, they've heard it in the classroom studio, and now they can go back and, pull it out of a menu and have some context. And they now know, like, okay, that's supposed to sound like this. That's why it's there. That's why this old looking thing that looks like it crawled out of a World War II movie is on my screen right now, and now I kind of get what I should be trying to do with it or something.
Yeah, you're right. If in fact they do understand that and get the reference point is everything, but you have to point it out. Okay, here's how it's supposed to sound. Try to match that. And it doesn't always happen.
No, but I tell you what, there have been a few classes that I've done where I've specifically set up some hardware processor and brought them all up one at a time to adjust it, take a compressor and have them understand where the threshold acts and how the ratio changes it, and then how to make up gain manually and all that. And then I'll put signal through a couple of, say, DBX 160s and then bring the plugin down and have them do it on that, or have them adjust an EQ like a GML stereo EQ or a Pultec or something like that, and then have them pull down a plugin and do it. And there is something to the sound, the presentation, the sound stage of some of the analog stuff that just about everybody in the room goes, yeah, that plugin's great, but it's not quite that thing,
Yeah.
And and I'm not trying to be, God, I feel like in answering that question, I'm coming off like some sort of it's the old analog stuff is the best, but it's not. That's not the point at all. They need context for why they were emulated, And once they get that context, then maybe they can go out and crank on the plugins, The one thing that's always impressed me more about plugins, though, about any of this stuff, is stuff that we couldn't do, in the analog domain. I mean, one of the things that's wonderful about immersing yourself into digital audio and Pro Tools and all the wonderful companies that make third-party plugins is that, look ahead limiting. Who would have dreamt? You know what I mean? Back in 1970, I would have given anything for that.
Well, one of the things about plugins that I really like now is the fact that developers are thinking outside the emulations. They're reaching for new things that we hadn't thought about or weren't capable of doing in the analog domain. And I find that much more attractive than trying to make another version of an 1176.
I totally 100% agree. That's where it's got to go. The fab filter stuff, they're not bogged down in trying to recreate the past and doing a great job at it. But I totally agree with what you said. And I would just restate it if I can.
Yeah. You stopped teaching in when, 2015?
Well, there was a buyout, and all I saw was, if I do that, maybe I can go back and make some music again. The truth is, I stopped full time then, and I continued to teach at least one adjunct course a semester since then and through the pandemic. I keep threatening to not go back, and I just yesterday signed a contract for one more. We'll see. Okay,
so that leads me to my next question. How have students changed over the time that you've been teaching?
So now I have to realize that some of them may hear this.
Right.
And that's there's some really great things that have happened. I mean, they're much more facile with technology. They don't stumble around on computers like they did in 1995. It's more second nature to them to look at a user interface and to try to suss it out. So that's a real positive. I think there's an issue, and it may even have to do with the pandemic, or that's a factor, of attention span. I think work ethic is different than it used to be. I won't say it doesn't exist. I'm not going to sit there and, talk about how we used to walk 20 miles to school with no shoes. I really feel that there is a decline in work ethic. This is an art and a science. And there's a lot of information that you want in your back pocket to be able to be really good at what you do. To be able to make that big, beautiful mix, you have to understand the technology that might come up and have an artistic, kind of view of the thing as a whole so that you're not doing things that are silly. And that takes time and that takes study. That doesn't mean everybody has to go to a college to do it. A lot of people are really good at doing their own research and learning on their own. And some people are and some people aren't. But I think that what I question is, are people willing to put in the time to get really good at something? It's a little bit like playing, it's a little bit like the craft of, being a really good player with really good chops, or a singer with really good pitch. I mean, I think that this generation's musicians and singers are as creative and as wonderful as ever. I'm not sure they have gone through or been dragged through those situations that get you to be a real tight player in a rhythm section, like our generation got to do. And I think that musical education is a real advantage. I don't mean that if you don't do that, you're not a real player, but it's really helpful. Their interest level in that stuff has waned a bit.
See, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's been proven that multitasking doesn't work, scientifically proven. But everybody grows up now multitasking. And as a result, it's hard to concentrate on one thing, just one thing, for a long time.
I think you're right. I think our environment is so oriented towards that our attention spans are shorter, all of that stuff. And that think about it. When I started doing this, at any given session, there was an engineer, there was an arranger, there was a producer, you know what I mean? There were musicians who played their instruments. And now that's all one guy with a laptop and an interface, or often is. And so there's all those hats. And all those people in the past maybe narrowcast their careers and they learned a very specific set of skills. Now you have to know all of it, which is kind of daunting. And, these kids are presented with a reality that's pretty harsh. They have to be able to do it all. They have to be able to write the song, sing the song, promote themselves, record it, master it,
The students that you have, are they musical? Are they musicians first?
I would say the majority are.
Okay. There's a reason why I asked that. I have a really good friend who's done well in his career, 18 Grammys, and he's teaching at a college part-time. I don't want to say he's disrespected, but that's not the case at all. He's unrecognized because he's from another generation. And he says most of the students that he has, all they want to do is they want to make beats. And they're not musicians so much as they are beat makers. They don't have a musical background. And I keep on saying, that's not the right place for you because it's like a brain surgeon that's going to take out a splinter from somebody, You're like miles ahead of where they can even perceive. But that's not the case for you.
It might even be miles off to the side. You know what I mean? Because their endeavor is kind of just as impressive to other people. And I don't know. I've actually, in thinking about what you just said, one of the things that comes to mind is when we get a really kind of amazing student who comes to us real hungry and wanting to learn, they bring a lot to the table. They are the ones who, when I say, hey, did anybody hear about some piece of news that comes up on your podcast or from Production Expert or from Avid and making an announcement, they already know. And they have their own take on it and they want to know yours and they want to modify their thinking based on other. And, often I'm learning about stuff through them because of how fanatically interested they are in the latest and greatest. I love it. I mean, I love when there's dialogue in a classroom. Yeah, of course, I want to direct it. I want to keep us on topic. But I like when people present their own experiences and that enhances what we're doing.
Okay, let's change the topic a little bit because I was looking at your website and you made a point of saying that for mixing, you much prefer analog summing, and also the fact that your recalls are fairly quick.
When I came back to doing this, more seriously full-time 5-6 years ago, I realized that I kind of liked the idea of the gear that I've collected over many years that, would normally use on the front end, like tracking through the stuff, compressors, limiters, EQs, and the like. I have always liked using them in a mix. And I wanted to figure out a way to be able to easily integrate them without it becoming, instead of just double clicking the session open and we start working, I didn't want it to be an hour-long process just to get back to where you want to restart. So for one thing, the analog summer that I use is the Neve 8816 with an 8804 fader pack, and it has a recall program. So for starters, all the pan positions, all of the, basically everything, all the levels are all part of a snapshot that is recallable. So that part of the puzzle is taken care of. In the comment section of Pro Tools, I write any analog gear and the signal path that is, if the lead vocal is going through a 1073 and then 1176, that's written in the comment section. While I'm spending the 3.5 minutes to run the tune, because obviously it has to play in real time towards the end, to be able to get it back in on a stereo audio track in the Pro Tools, having been summed, I take 4 or 5 high-res cell phone pictures, crop them, and throw them in the session folder. And I really do have it down to about, I want to say 10 minutes. I'll put up this song. I'll set the patches up for the analog gear. Look at 4 or 5 photos. I'm not, I am tempted occasionally to use 1 million hardware processors, but I try to stay in the range of 5 or 6 outboard pieces, and plus a a stereo EQ and a stereo compressor on the way back in. And I do feel this is not about zeros and ones versus, summing and is it accurate? And am I just liking transformer distortion? I'm disinterested in all of that. I really, what gets me is I like the workflow. And when I use it, my stuff comes out better. That doesn't mean it's that way for everybody. I know that. And if there's a certain project where I know there's going to be a lot of swapping files and going back and forth and revisions, I'll mix it in the box. I no problem, with that. That's another issue. I have too many plugins.
Yeah.
It's almost crippling. But I've really gotten to love this process. There's often a DBX 160 on a bass. There's a 1073 maybe on a lead vocal, and not much more, a couple more, a tube compressor here or there,
Yeah.
And then the sound of the summer, the sound of the Neve Summer has, it's basically a transformer output summing amp that sounds a lot like a console. And I know what it feels like to drive that circuit a little bit and to get results that I like, not crazy distortion, but just to warm things up a little. And it's the way I enjoy working.
Okay, last question, Kevin. What's the best piece of advice that maybe you learned along the way or somebody imparted to you?
Well, of course I knew this was coming because I'm a fan of your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I alternate between two answers, but the one, and it's in sync with our discussions about education, I guess. So my dad didn't get the music thing, like he was okay. He was supportive and all, beyond supportive. When I think about it, when I had a studio in his basement in Queens in a row house, and he would go out and work the neighbors so they weren't pissed off when the drums are too loud. But so beyond supportive, but he was like, look, if you really want to do music as a career, and I have not earned $1 since I had a paper route that didn't relate to music. So he said, just finish a 4-year degree and do it for no other reason than if you do want to make a left turn or you're looking for other opportunities when you're 30 or 35 or whatever, that you've got that behind you and you can kind of move from that point. Because I was ready, my band was working 5 nights a week. What do I need college for?
Yeah.
I really was dying not to do it. And it did take me 5.5 years and a summer to finish college. But, and I will say this, for the 10 years after college, no one ever asked me if I went to college or where I went to college or what my degree was in, because I was making records in studios. But when I went and decided, I might want to teach this stuff, all of a sudden, I already had a college degree. I can enroll in a master's program and get an education master's quickly so it was great advice, because that whole second chapter could not have happened had I not completed an undergraduate degree when I was in my 20s, rather than just letting it go because I wanted to be on tour or in a studio.
You can find out more about Kevin at theworkshoppeast.com. That's The Workshoppe. Workshop has 2 P's and an E. WORKSHOPPE East.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. Remember that you can learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news when you sign up for my newsletter at bobbyowsinski.com. There, you'll also find out about openings for my latest online classes and special events. That's bobbyowsinski.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyoinnercircle.com, or you can find it in Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Mixcloud, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, and Podbean. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyowinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.